So, could you tell me what your name is and what your connection is with North Kilworth, please?
I'm Sophie and I'm a resident on Wheelwright Close and have been for about a year and a half now.
Okay, and who's that beside you?
This is Ted, who was born on the 30th of March this year.
So, right in the middle of lockdown.
Yes, about a week into lockdown, official lockdown.
Okay.
He was born at Leicester General, and it kind of, so obviously my pregnancy we didn't have COVID, and then it started to get stranger towards the end of my pregnancy. So as I had more clinics towards the end, that's when masks came in, and my husband Nick was restricted to come in with me for the clinics, and then it became on the day I had a elected caesarean section. So on the day of the section, Nick wasn't allowed to be with me. He could be with me for the prep for the surgery and then the actual birth, but then afterwards they said you can stay for about 40 minutes. And in the end, I think he had an hour and a half, but he wasn't allowed on the ward. So whereas normally the husband would stay with you, and I think with a C-section you're meant to be in there for quite a few days actually. They were expecting the turnaround to be 24 hours for a C-section.
Wow.
So I think I was there for about 26 hours in the end, but yeah, the next day I went home. And I know that a usual natural labour, they wanted you out in 4 hours, so it was quite, and because it was quite fresh into lockdown, only being a week, midwives and staff, the rules seemed to change every hour. Sometimes they'd come and see me and they were wearing a mask, then it was a visor, then it was a mask and a visor, and then it was a mask when they were talking to each other but not to patients, and they felt uneasy, and it made, especially the midwives who are there to make you feel comfortable, and they want to be smiley, and they couldn't be because they were wearing the mask, and I think that's what they were finding really hard. But then we were sent home the next day, and it was just me and my husband with our first baby.
Oh, so your first one, so you
First
didn't
baby.
have any previous experience to draw on?
None at all.
Oh gosh.
And my parents live 2 hours away up in Cheshire, so we were on our own in our own little bubble.
Wow.
And they didn't come down until 2 months later, so we really were, I should say, on our own. Completely. I mean, Ted didn't meet another human properly for those first 2 months.
Wow.
And it was quite strange.
Yeah. How did you deal with that?
Luckily, my husband was put on furlough, so at least we were together, because we did NCT classes, and I'm quite close with the girls from there still, and they had
NCT?
I don't actually know what NCT stands for, but it's antenatal classes.
Okay, right.
So we went for 7 weeks before. We had a session every week where we learned how to give birth and then look after a baby.
Right.
But it's a really good social thing. You've instantly got that network of people who are going through the same thing. They were all having their first child, and they ended up all having them in lockdown too. So we had, instead of meeting up, we had Zoom chats and things every week just to kind of check in on each other.
Yeah.
So that helped. But in terms of people around us, we were alone. And like I say, Nick being on furlough made it slightly easier. We kind of got through it together. And that's a silver lining actually, because he didn't just have 2 weeks paternity leave and then back to work. He had 4 months in the end that he spent, every day with Ted and I. So that kind of that bond and that opportunity was there, whereas that wouldn't have been there before. So
did you have any crises during that time where things happened, you didn't know what to do, and
No, we were lucky in effect. He hasn't been the best nighttime sleeper, so that's got harder as it's gone on. It's kind of built up in how difficult it's been. And there's been times when you just think, I just wish my mum and dad could be here and just help out a little bit, clean the house, take him so I can have a nap. That hasn't happened until more recently when lockdown eased. But no, we didn't have any major crises, which helped quite a lot. I think it could have been a lot worse, but it's things like friends haven't met him. There's still some friends that haven't met him. Everything's been from afar. He's barely been held by anybody. I don't know what his perception of the world is like, but it's quite a small world.
Because that's the thing, isn't it, about a new baby? It's for the family that the baby comes into, but it's that whole network that joins in the joy and helps you celebrate, and you know, it's a big thing, and that's been kind of taken away from us by this lockdown, isn't it? Yeah,
and it can feel lonely. I mean, Nick's back at work, but he works from home, but he works during the day, so it is just me and Ted. Luckily, we've been able to form a support group with those people the mums I met in the antenatal classes, and we've been able to meet socially distanced, but been able to meet and kind of just share you know, ideas. We've all started feeding our babies, kind of weaning them, and so it's helpful to how are they doing it, and what approach have they taken, and learning from each other. So that helps a lot, especially because things have changed a lot since my parents had me. So I can talk to my mum about things, but I mean, there's some things that are completely different. So it's helpful to have people going through it at the same time. And hopefully the babies will be able to play together one day and become friends.
Oh, we look forward for those days when we can do normal things like play.
You can see the wider world.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
So Sophie, have you had any need to access? Oh dear, his hat's
pulled his hat down over his face.
That's not a good thing when the lights go out.
Look, mister. Here's your giraffe. Right, there we go. Sorry.
Okay. So, have you had any needs to access medical support during this time, and how's that gone?
So at the very beginning, midwife support and health visitor support was really restricted. I had one visit and one phone call from the midwife, and again it was all distanced and masked and aproned. It wasn't the kind of friendly midwife experience that I'd had, or health visitor experience I'd had whilst I was pregnant. I was signed off very quickly as well, and if I wanted any support, it was only a phone call, which limited support. I struggled to feed him at the very beginning, and so that was phone calls, and there's only so much help that a phone call can be. And he had a tongue tie, which initially in hospital we were told that it wouldn't be an issue, but with his problems with feeding, it became quite evident it probably was an issue. When speaking to the GP, he said there's a waiting list, and those sorts of procedures just weren't happening. We were peak pandemic at that point. We're kind of talking early April. So we ended up having to go private in order to get the procedure done quickly. Other mums in my antenatal class, one baby's been quite poorly with allergies, and they think he's got a kidney stone, and she's had to go private for quite a lot of those appointments because NHS appointments were just getting pushed further and further back. And so she's had to go private in order to get those things sorted. Now, even though he was really struggling and he lost a lot of weight and, you know, quite serious things, the doctors said that they've never really known a kidney stone in a baby before. And yet we're now 7 months in and he's still not been
dealt with, helped.
What's the phrase?
Sorted out.
Sorted, he's still quite poorly with it all.
So that, I mean, in the context of the absence of support, the fact that you've got all that anxiety on top of that as well is difficult to deal with, isn't it? You know?
Yeah, there's an extra layer on top of what's already considered quite a difficult time with your first baby. And when you'd normally have that family support and friends support, we just didn't have it at all. We were in our own little bubble.
Yeah, tough. So, you know, we're now facing our second experience of lockdown. What's been the worst aspect for you, Sophie, of lockdown?
It's definitely the social restrictions of lockdown and that idea that my parents' friends can't come down again. So even though this lockdown's considered not as restrictive and there's certain things that have been kept in place, my parents can't come down anymore. I can't meet friends anymore. Luckily, babies have been taken away out of that. Well, it's not a rule of 6 anymore, but they don't count as people that are meeting up. So it does mean that I can meet one other mum and we can go on a socially distant walk together. Whereas before, we'd have classed as 2 people and therefore we wouldn't have been able to do it. So that's helped slightly, but the idea that you can't come into households and things has definitely hit us again quite hard.
Particularly as we move into winter and you know, being outdoors is not going to be as attractive a proposition as it was in sort of May and June.
Exactly. The antenatal group, like I say, we used to meet every week out in the park, and then as it started to rain and got really cold, we were having to not meet up, and you could really feel all of us felt the difference not meeting up just for those 3 or 4 hours a week.
Probably the highlight of your week.
Well, yeah, we do it on a Wednesday. It was right in the middle of the week, something to look forward to on the Monday. It gave a bit of structure to the day, and it just means that we can sit, share stories, talk about babies, but also talk about everything else. But luckily, we were able to become a support group and have rented out the hall.
The village hall,
The village hall, and we've still been able to do it. Now with lockdown, we can't do it anymore. So we're back to Zoom calls. So we're trying that for the first time this week, tomorrow, and we'll see how it goes, but it's not the same, is it?
So Sophie, if you had to pick 3 words to kind of sum up the experience of lockdown for you, what would those 3 words be?
Lonely, unexpected, difficult.
Thank you very much.